Imagine an object so powerful that it is said that merely touching it could cause instant death. An artifact so sacred that, according to tradition, it was the direct meeting point between heaven and earth. The Ark of the Covenant carries within itself a magnetism that spans millennia, encompassing faith, mystery, and a spiritual technology that most dare not even consider. But what if I told you that everything you've heard so far is just the surface? What if what was veiled in ancient texts, hidden behind symbols and metaphors, is something that Jesus deeply knew, and that can transform your own connection with the divine today? The Ark of the Covenant first appears as a divinely delivered project to Moses on Mount Sinai, a receptacle made of acacia wood, lined with gold inside and out, containing the 10 Commandments. But anyone who delves into the details realizes that it was much more than just a simple sacred chest. The way it was transported, how it should be handled, and even the structure of the tabernacle where it was housed. Everything followed meticulous instructions that allude to spiritual and energetic engineering. This leads us to an inevitable question. Why so much rigor for something that, theoretically, was just symbolic? This enigma has not gone unnoticed by scholars, archaeologists, and spiritualists throughout the centuries. The Ark has become the object of desire for emperors, the target of secret expeditions, and the inspiration for adventure movies. But what intrigues most is not the fact that it mysteriously disappeared, but rather what it represented, and continues to represent. Because the truth is that behind its simple appearance hides an ancient key, perhaps capable of reactivating dormant states of consciousness, reconnecting the human to the eternal, and revealing the purpose of our existence. In biblical accounts, the Ark did not merely represent God, it was His presence. When the Hebrew people marched with the Ark leading the way, unlikely victories occurred. When the Ark rested in the Tabernacle, the cloud of divine glory descended and remained. There are records of severe punishments for those who dared to touch it or approach it improperly. All of this suggests that its power was not merely allegorical, but real. And most unsettling, this power seemed to have a mind of its own. It reacted to impurity, responded to true worship, and influenced the surrounding field. This field of influence, in fact, has been the subject of recent debates. Spiritual physicists and engineers have raised hypotheses about the Ark as a type of electromagnetic capacitor, a scalar energy generator, or even a vibrational resonance machine. Even though these ideas may seem bold, they converse with biblical descriptions that speak of lights, sounds, tremors, and physical manifestations in its presence. If we consider the Bible as a coded book, where mystical language reveals deeper realities, the Ark emerges as something far beyond a simple religious icon. And what does all this have to do with Jesus? Much more than one might imagine. Even though the Gospels do not directly mention the Ark, they are laden with symbolism and enigmatic speeches by Christ that indicate a deep knowledge of this sacred instrument. Jesus grew up in a context where the stories about the Ark were passed down orally, studied in synagogues, and carried the weight of an unresolved mystery. It's impossible to ignore that his mission, his symbolism as a new covenant, and his healing power point to a mastery of the same principle that sustained the Ark. And here we begin to touch on a truth that many prefer to ignore. What if Jesus, when speaking about being the temple, the way, and the life, was referencing not just a spiritual figure, but an internal mechanism that replaced the original function of the Ark and the Tabernacle? Does the temple veil that tore at the moment of his death represent just a physical event, or the end of the need for mediation between man and the divine? These questions open doors to a deeper understanding of the role of the Ark and of Christ. The disappearance of the Ark has never been officially explained. It vanishes from records after the destruction of the first temple, and the silence surrounding it ever since only amplifies its aura of mystery. Was it the Babylonians? Was it hidden by priests? Is it in Axum, Ethiopia, as Orthodox monks still maintain today? Or could it be, as some rabbis and mystics suggest, that it was removed from this plane and will only return when humanity is ready to understand it? This line of thinking directly connects with the coming of Jesus and the concept of a progressive revelation of divine truth. And this truth seems to lie less in the physical object and more in what it represented: the direct, uninterrupted, and powerful connection with the source. What fascinates about the Ark is not just its history, but the feeling that it still vibrates somewhere, whether on a distant mountain or within the awakened human being. The Ark may have been the most powerful symbol of the union between matter and spirit, between technology and transcendence. And it is this fusion that we find in the figure of Jesus, not as a mere moral teacher, but as a fully initiated member of the ancient mysteries. Every detail of the Ark, from its dimensions to its ornamentation, seems to have been encoded with cosmic knowledge. The cherubs with outstretched wings, the golden mercy seat, the rings and poles for its transportation. Everything resonates with patterns that echo in other ancient cultures. And it's not a coincidence. The language of wisdom is universal, and those with eyes to see recognize the connections. Egypt, Vedic India, Mesopotamia, all speak of sacred boxes, vehicles of gods, and portals of presence. The Ark, in this context, is yet another link in this grand tapestry. Therefore, the question that should burn in our hearts is not, "Where is the Ark?" Zrenia, but rather, why do we still feel that it calls us? Because something within us recognizes the truth when we encounter it. Something inside us is activated when we hear these stories. Perhaps we are not just rediscovering an artifact, but remembering something that has always been within us, a forgotten spark, a severed connection, an inner temple that yearns to be reactivated. And at the center of this reunion is the figure of Jesus. Not the character tamed by tradition, but the profound master who knew the oldest mysteries, who spoke with authority about heavenly things, and who carried within himself the very power of the Ark. Because perhaps, and here is the real secret, the Ark was never lost. It simply became flesh and dwelt among us. Long before stone temples were erected in Jerusalem, there existed a mobile structure made from simple yet carefully chosen materials, known as the Tabernacle. But this was not merely a transient sanctuary. It was the first model given by God to the Hebrew people to establish a dwelling for the divine presence in the physical world. When we observe the details of its construction, we see that it is not just about sacred architecture, but spiritual engineering, a true portal between the invisible and the visible, where cosmic laws met matter. And all of this revolved around the Ark of the Covenant. The tabernacle was revealed to Moses through precise instructions, received directly from God at the top of Mount Sinai. Each dimension, material, and internal division had a hidden meaning. It was not just any construction, but an earthly replica of a heavenly reality. "Build everything according to the model that was shown to you on the mountain," said the Eternal One. This seemingly simple phrase carries immense weight. The tabernacle was the materialization of a divine pattern. It not only housed the Ark, but activated it, as if it were a key fitting perfectly into a cosmic lock. The structure was divided into three main parts: the atrium, the holy place, and the Holy of Holies. This division is not merely functional, but symbolic. It represents the three levels of consciousness: the external, the internal, and the deepest, the spiritual essence. Each layer of the tabernacle required a higher degree of purification and intention. The Holy of Holies, where the Ark was kept, could only be accessed by the high priest once a year, in a delicate ritual that symbolized the entrance into the pure presence of God. This pattern clearly mirrors the inner journey of a human being towards the center of the soul. The materials used in construction are also extremely symbolic. The acacia wood, resistant to decay, represents purified human nature. The gold, divine light. The purple, crimson, and blue fabrics point to different levels of reality, and spiritual purity. The curtains, filled with embroidered cherubim, not only decorated, but energetically protected the space, keeping the vibration in a high state. Each piece of furniture, from the chandelier to the incense altar, had a specific energetic function. Together, they formed a spiritual circuit where the energy from the source was received, concentrated, and redistributed. The Ark, placed at the absolute center of the Holy of Holies, functioned as an energy core. Many scholars of occultism and sacred geometry assert that the positioning of the Ark in the Tabernacle follows a toroidal pattern, the way the universe organizes energy. This turns the Tabernacle into a kind of spiritual reactor, capable of generating vibrational coherence fields that directly affected those who approached with reverence. The priest, upon entering, was not merely performing a ritual, he was being tuned into the field of divine presence. This idea gains even more strength when we study parallels with other ancient civilizations. The Egyptians, for example, used internal chambers in pyramids for practices of spiritual ascension. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia also followed tiered structures that allowed contact with the gods. In all cases, there was architecture oriented towards the sky, with portals, divisions, and purification chambers. The Hebrew tabernacle does not deviate from this pattern, but with one essential difference: it was designed not to manipulate the divine, but to humbly receive the direct presence of the Creator. The spiritual functions of the tabernacle go beyond what traditional theology presents. When studying the practices of the priests, it becomes clear that they not only offered sacrifices, they performed a true inner alchemy. The aromas of the incense, the sounds of the instruments, the specific garments, and the ritual movements created a highly energetically charged environment. The high priest, upon entering the Holy of Holies, would enter a trance, a sort of ecstasy that allowed access to revelation and direct communion. All of this points to a highly refined spiritual technology. Within this living structure, the Ark was the source of the field, but the tabernacle was the body that sustained it. Just as the human body houses the soul, the tabernacle housed the presence. What few understand is that this model, revealed in the deserts of Sinai, was a mirror of the human being itself. The courtyard represented the physical body, the holy place the emotional and mental, and the Holy of Holies the spirit. This means that, in essence, the tabernacle was an initiatory map for the path back to the divine presence, and it was on this map that Jesus based many of his hidden teachings. The Gospel of John says that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The word used for dwelt is literally tabernacled, that is, set up his tabernacle. This linguistic choice is not casual. It indicates that Jesus presented himself as the new tabernacle, the new dwelling place of the divine presence, replacing the physical model with a living body. This is only possible if he deeply knew the inner workings of the original tabernacle. His acts of healing, reading the scriptures, and confronting the Pharisees in the temple point to a knowledge that goes beyond the letter of the law. One of the most intriguing aspects of the tabernacle is the use of sound and frequency. The bells on the priest's clothing, the Levitical chants, the shofars, everything resonated within the structure like a spiritual symphony. Each sound had the purpose of aligning energies, purifying the field, and opening connection channels. Interestingly, this intentional use of sound echoes Vedic and Tibetan practices, where mantras and wind instruments are also used to awaken energy centers. Nothing was random. The tabernacle was a temple of sound, light, and form. With this, we understand that the tabernacle was more than a physical place. It was a vibrational portal, a living mechanism that allowed communion between worlds. And the Ark, at its center, was like the divine spark within the human heart. Jesus, understanding this, didn't just fulfill a prophetic role. He updated the system. He embodied the tabernacle. And by doing so, he offered us a living model of connection with the divine, accessible not only to priests, but to all who seek with a pure heart. This understanding of the tabernacle as a mirror of the self and an antenna to heaven changes everything. It calls us to abandon dead religiosity and rediscover the living sacred within us. The sacred structure is no longer in tents or temples, but in our bodies, in our hearts. The same pattern that activated the presence in the ark can be accessed today through intention, purity, and awakened consciousness. The path is open. The architecture has been revealed. And the call now is to rebuild the inner tabernacle. Among the many questions surrounding the figure of Jesus, one stands out in a silent yet deeply unsettling way. Why do the canonical Gospels say nothing about the Ark of the Covenant? Would it be plausible to imagine that someone like him, who grew up immersed in the Jewish tradition and who frequented the Temple of Jerusalem, would be unaware of the most sacred object in the history of his people? Or could the silence actually be an intentional veil that conceals knowledge reserved only for those with eyes to see and ears to hear? Jesus was born at a time when the temple had already lost the physical ark, but not its symbolic memory. The absence of the ark in the Holy of Holies was a silent wound in the heart of the nation. The priests continued the rituals, but the core of the divine presence, according to the accounts, was no longer there. It was like an empty structure, a body without a soul. And it is precisely in this context that Jesus emerges, challenging the religious, renewing spiritual practices, and above all, offering a new understanding of what it means to be a dwelling place of the divine. All indications are that he came not to deny the ark, but to make it alive again in himself. There is a subtle yet powerful link between Jesus and the Essenes, a mystical Jewish sect that inhabited the desert region, especially in Qumran, on the shores of the Dead Sea. The manuscripts found there reveal a profound spiritual line, committed to purity, hidden knowledge, and messianic expectation. These men and women lived away from the priestly corruption of Jerusalem and cultivated an intimate relationship with the Torah in its highest form, as a key to inner revelations. Many contemporary scholars admit that John the Baptist may have been an Essene, and if he was the precursor to Jesus, it is plausible that Christ himself may have been initiated into these hidden teachings. The Dead Sea Scrolls also mention a heavenly Ark of the Covenant, indicating that the concept of the Ark was not limited to the physical object. This superior Ark would be accessible only to those with open spiritual eyes. This type of language is deeply aligned with the speeches of Jesus, who often used phrases such as, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear," and "My kingdom is not of this world." In other words, he was operating from a knowledge that transcends material boundaries and touches the deepest layers of spiritual reality. When Jesus enters the temple and drives out the money changers, many see only an act of moral indignation. However, in light of the mysteries of the tabernacle, this act carries another weight. It is the purification of a corrupted sacred space, an attempt to reactivate the true meaning of the temple as a place of presence. On several occasions, he quotes Isaiah saying, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations," indicating that he was reclaiming the original purpose of the sacred space, to be a point of connection between heaven and earth. This is the same role that the ark played in Moses' tabernacle. Jesus also often speaks in terms that recall the tabernacle and the ark. By stating, "I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father except through me," he evokes the symbolism of the priest who traverses the layers of the tabernacle to the Holy of Holies, where the divine presence resides. By saying that, "In my Father's house there are many mansions," he is referring not only to heaven, but to levels of consciousness, the same ones that the tabernacle taught in its tripartite structure. And when he promises rivers of living water, flowing from within the believer, he is activating the language of Eden, the temple, and the ark, all connected by this river of spiritual life. Another essential point is the way Jesus healed. He did not use long formulas, nor instruments. A word, a touch, a look was enough. This indicates mastery over energy fields, vibrational alignment, and absolute presence, exactly as the ark's action was described in ancient times. Where the ark rested, there was healing, victory, and liberation. Where Jesus passed, the same signs manifested. This is not mere coincidence. It is evidence that he not only understood the mystery, but had become the very manifestation of it. But why then did Jesus not speak clearly about the ark? Why such eloquent silence? The answer may lie in the initiatory nature of his mission. Just as the ark was accessible only to the high priest, and only once a year the deepest mysteries were not openly revealed. They were conveyed through parables, gestures, symbols. Jesus said, "To you it is given to know the mysteries of the kingdom, but to those outside, everything is told in parables." The truth was not hidden out of fear, but for protection. Because the one who receives a sacred secret without being prepared turns the blessing into a curse. This selective approach is typical of mystery schools, from Egypt to India. The deepest teachings have always been veiled, not out of elitism, but out of spiritual responsibility. And Jesus, within this context, operated as a master of veiled wisdom. He knew that the presence of the ark was no longer a matter of locating a lost object, but of reactivating an internal, invisible, yet palpable reality. He became the new conduit, the new mercy seat, the new covenant. And for those who were ready, his words were like the flames between the cherubim, burning, revealing, transformative. This leads us to a crucial point: Jesus as the new tabernacle. The Gospels repeatedly state that God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself. In other words, what was previously accessed only through rituals, temples, and sacred objects was now alive, embodied, in motion. He was the altar, the priest, and the ark, all at once. He encompassed within himself the three levels of the tabernacle, and more. He taught how others too could become living dwellings of the divine. This is the forgotten key, the hidden legacy, and the reason why his mission goes far beyond the cross. Throughout his ministry, Jesus attracted people thirsty for something deeper. His disciples were not just followers, they were students of an ancient spiritual science, rediscovered in his presence. They were being initiated into the mysteries of the kingdom, which was not a distant place, but a state of consciousness where the Ark of the Covenant, now symbolized by the inner divine spark, became accessible again. And that's why he said, "The kingdom of God is within you." It wasn't a metaphor, it was a calling. In the end, Jesus' silence about the Ark is not omission, it's revelation. He didn't need to name it, because he embodied it. And those who touched his robe, who listened to his words with an open heart, were unknowingly drawing near to the Holy of Holies. They were experiencing the same presence that once rested on the golden mercy seat between the cherubim. The difference is that now, this presence had eyes, voice, and compassion, and it walked among men as the living light of what has always been eternal. Since scholars and archaeologists began investigating the biblical descriptions of the Ark of the Covenant, an increasingly daring theory has begun to emerge. What if the Ark was not just a religious symbol, but a true spiritual technological device, capable of emitting energy fields with real effects on the environment and people? The idea, at first glance, may seem fanciful, but when we delve into the details of the object and the experiences reported around it, a new panorama begins to form, one that unites sacred engineering, forgotten science, and pure spirituality. The specifications of the Ark are described in Exodus with striking detail. A rectangle of acacia wood, coated in gold inside and out, with 2 cherubim of solid gold on the mercy seat. The wood, light and durable, is wrapped by a highly powerful conductive metal, gold. This combination is not arbitrary. Today, engineers and physicists look at this structure and immediately think of a capacitor, a device used to store electrical charge. The Ark, with its alternating layers of conductors and insulators, could, in theory, generate and retain high-intensity electrostatic energy fields. This would explain, for example, the violent physical reactions reported in the Bible. Uzzah, who improperly touched the ark, died instantly. On other occasions, enemies of the Hebrew people fell ill or died after capturing it. When the ark was transported correctly, miraculous victories occurred. It seemed to be a living source of power, invisible, yet palpable. And it wasn't just a matter of faith, something was indeed happening around it. Some researchers suggest that, in addition to electrical energy, it could also emit radiation or sound resonance capable of altering the consciousness of those around it. This hypothesis gains strength when we compare the ark with sacred objects from other cultures. In Egypt, there were sacred boats that contained secret objects, often associated with the presence of the gods. In Vedic India, the vimanas, described as divine vehicles, operated through sounds, special metals, and sacred geometries. In both cases, spiritual science was inseparable from subtle technology. The ark fits perfectly into this same pattern, an artifact that is at the same time an altar, an antenna, and a catalyst. Its presence was felt not out of superstition, but because there was, in fact, a field in action. The field generated by the ark can be compared to a toroidal field, a donut-shaped self-sustaining energy structure, present from atoms to galaxies. The human heart emits this type of field, and so does the Earth itself. This type of field is the basis for the functioning of free energy technologies, like those that Nikola Tesla sought to develop. Tesla, in fact, often spoke of the ether, a subtle and invisible field that permeates everything. Interestingly, the ark was described as a meeting point between worlds, where the presence of God manifested between the cherubim. This does not sound like a metaphor, but rather a description of a real energy condensation point. Another intriguing point is the role of sound. During the siege of Jericho, the ark was carried in procession, while the priests played trumpets. On the seventh day, the walls collapsed. The combination of sound vibration, the presence of the ark, and spiritual intention seems to have triggered a physical reaction of great magnitude. This points to the conscious use of resonance and frequency, something that is now beginning to be rediscovered in fields such as music therapy, quantum physics, and sound healing practices. The universe vibrates, and the ark, it seems, was capable of tuning into and amplifying these vibrations. In ancient times, science and spirituality were not separated. What we call technology today was, at that time, part of an integrated wisdom, based on harmony with the laws of the cosmos. The problem is that over time this knowledge was fragmented, veiled, and even lost. But traces remain, and it is increasingly clear that the ark was one of these traces, an artifact that encapsulated within itself the understanding of how matter, spirit, and energy intertwine. Jesus, in his teachings, demonstrated mastery over these laws. When he healed with a single word, when he calmed the sea, when he turned water into wine, he was activating principles that physics is just beginning to glimpse, but which the ancients already knew. He operated in resonance with subtle fields, harmonized frequencies, and transcended material limitations. All of this points to a knowledge that goes far beyond theology. It is a knowledge of vibrational, energetic, quantum nature, exactly the type of wisdom that the ark seemed to encapsulate. And it's not a coincidence that Jesus never sought to rebuild the physical ark. Instead, his mission was to reveal that the true power of the ark could now dwell within the awakened human being. By saying, "You will do greater works than these," he was activating this hidden code. It was not just metaphor, it was instruction. The divine presence, which previously required gold, wood, rituals, and veils, could now manifest in a living body, aligned, vibrating in coherence with the source. The new ark would be made of flesh, of awakened consciousness, of pure intention. Perhaps that's why the ark has disappeared, not by accident, but by design. It fulfilled its role. And with the emergence of Jesus, the new tabernacle, the new manifestation of presence, the cycle was completed. But its memory remains. It resonates in the collective unconscious, attracts seekers, inspires scientists, provokes religious people, because it is both a symbol and a reality, a reminder that there is a superior spiritual science, and that this science can be rediscovered, integrated, and lived. At the heart of this reunion is the recognition that everything vibrates, that faith, the word, the sound, the gesture, and the peaceful heart are frequencies that shape reality. The Ark merely condensed this into material form, but today, the invitation is for each one to become their own Ark, a living receptacle of the divine, a point of manifestation of presence, a channel between heaven and earth. And this, Jesus knew from the beginning, because he was the very living expression of this sacred science, veiled to the world's eyes, but eternally present for those who dare to remember. Since the Ark was conceived in the divine instructions given to Moses, it has never been simply an object of collective worship. It has always been shrouded in secrecy, restricted, surrounded by strict protocols, and accessible only to a select few. This exclusivity was not a religious whim, but a protection. The power it channeled required not only physical preparation, but internal purification, emotional control, and expanded consciousness. Access to the Ark was a privilege reserved for a spiritual caste, the keepers of the secret, men initiated in the invisible laws of the universe. And understanding who these men were is essential to comprehend why the Ark was veiled, and how Jesus fits into this mystery. The first formal guardians of the Ark were the Levites, descendants of the tribe of Levi, chosen from the 12 tribes of Israel to serve exclusively in the functions of the sanctuary. But even among the Levites, there were levels. Only the high priest, a direct descendant of Aaron, could enter the Holy of Holies and approach the Ark once a year on Yom Kippur. He did this not by his own right, but after a rigorous process of purification, fasting, confessions, ritual baths, and specific garments. The responsibility was so great that, according to ancient reports, he would enter with a rope tied to his ankle. If he died in the divine presence, he could be removed without anyone else having to risk themselves. But the Levitical priesthood was merely an outward face. There was an older, deeper knowledge, reserved for a few, a legacy that originated long before Moses, in the enigmatic figure of Melchizedek. King of righteousness, priest of the Most High God, who blessed Abraham with bread and wine. He appears in the biblical narrative as someone outside the lineage of Levi, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life. The Epistle to the Hebrews affirms that Jesus was a priest according to this higher order. And this gives us a crucial clue. There was a parallel spiritual lineage, preserved outside of formal institutions, that carried the deepest secrets of the divine presence. This spiritual lineage was preserved among prophets, mystics, and kings. Moses, who received the revelation of the Ark, was instructed for years in Egypt, where he likely came into contact with mystery schools. Aaron, his brother, was the first high priest, but it is with David that the Ark gains new centrality. He seeks it, honors it with dances and songs, and wishes to build it a definitive temple. He is the one who organizes the Levites as musicians, poets, and spiritual guardians, not merely temple officials. His son Solomon builds the temple and places the Ark at its center. But Solomon also delves into hidden wisdoms, connects with other cultures, and gains fame as a magician and wise man. It was evident that the kings knew that the Ark was more than it seemed. After the exile in Babylon, the power of the Ark disappears from the records. But Jewish esoteric traditions do not cease. On the contrary, they flourish in the form of the Merkavah, the divine chariot described by Ezekiel, with mystical figures and wheels within wheels. This apocalyptic tradition describes visions and spiritual journeys through altered states of consciousness. Many scholars recognize that Ezekiel's experience is a symbolic reformulation of the experience with the Ark. That is, the physical object disappeared, but its essence remained accessible to those who knew how to seek it. Centuries later, this knowledge would be preserved in Jewish initiatory schools, such as the Essenes and later in the Kabbalah. The Essenes, as we have already explored, maintained purification rituals, deep study of the Torah, and contemplative practices. They hid their texts in caves, far from the eyes of Rome and the corrupt priests of Jerusalem. Jesus, quite possibly, was among them, or was influenced by their teachings. And if so, he had access not only to the content of the law, but to the spirit behind it, the science of presence, the science of the Ark. But the guardians of the Ark were not restricted to the Hebrew lineage. There are indications that knowledge about the power of the Ark, or similar devices, was shared, preserved, and even hidden among other peoples. The Ethiopians, for example, claim to this day to guard the true Ark in Axum, protected by monks who live in seclusion and never leave the chapel where it would rest. They claim to descend from the encounter between King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, who would have taken the Ark or a replica with her. The Ethiopian rituals surrounding the Ark are of profound reverence, shrouded in secrets and guarded by successive generations of initiates. During the Middle Ages, the Knights Templar emerged, an enigmatic order that, according to many legends, dug under Solomon's temple in Jerusalem and found sacred artifacts, possibly even the Ark itself. From then on, their influence grew astonishingly. Their buildings, their symbols, and their architecture were imbued with mystical codes, many of which hark back to the geometry of the Tabernacle. The Templars were persecuted and officially exterminated, but their wisdom did not disappear. It was passed on in silence, veiled, through esoteric orders and brotherhoods of seekers. All these groups, Levites, Essenes, Kabbalists, Ethiopians, Templars, form a hidden thread that runs through history, a thread that connects those who knew, those who protected, those who waited for the right time to reveal. Jesus appears in this thread not as a stranger, but as the culminating link. He embodies the attributes of king, priest, and prophet. He knows the science of sound, healing, and manifestation. He invokes presence with authority. And more than that, he transforms presence into personhood, actualizes the function of the Ark in himself, and later in the disciples who would follow him with awakened consciousness. Therefore, we can affirm that the true guardians of the Ark were not only historical figures, they continue among us. They are those who seek the truth with a pure heart, who unite reason and intuition, who recognize the sacred not as a belief, but as a vibrational reality. They do not carry titles, but a silent mission: to keep alive the memory of what the Ark represents, the union between the human and the divine, between matter and spirit, between earth and heaven. And here comes a profound provocation. What if you are one of these guardians? What if your spiritual quest, your desire for something greater, your intuition that there is more is in fact the call of the Ark echoing within you? Not as a lost object, but as a code waiting to be reactivated. Jesus knew of this call. He heard it. And he responded to it with every gesture, every word, every silence. Few mysteries in the history of spirituality and archaeology are as dense as the disappearance of the Ark of the Covenant. After centuries being the epicenter of divine presence in Israel, its sudden absence in the biblical account raises more than just doubts. It raises veils, because it was not just a physical disappearance. It was a planned concealment, shrouded in layers of silence, both political and spiritual. And understanding why the Ark disappeared is essential to understanding why Jesus never sought to restore it, and why perhaps it should never be found again in the way it once existed. The last direct biblical account of the Ark appears during the reign of Josiah, around 622 BC. After that, it disappears from historical records. The destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians should have marked the end of its existence, but the sacred text is silent about its fate. Strange, isn't it? An artifact that caused wars, that defined victories, that was the center of Hebrew worship, simply ceases to be mentioned. This silence is not an accident, it is a sign. Something was hidden, perhaps not just from history, but from humanity itself. Some theories assert that the Ark was hidden by priests before the Babylonian invasion. Others suggest that it was taken to a secret location, such as a cave on Mount Nebo, as indicated in apocryphal texts. There are those who say it was transported to Ethiopia by descendants of the Queen of Sheba. And there are still those who believe that it was taken to another plane, removed from this material world by divine intervention, to return only at the right time. These versions, although different, converge on an essential point. The Ark was not lost. It was taken out of circulation for a reason that transcends history. This reason begins to clarify when we consider the spiritual state of Israel at the time. The worship of the Ark had become institutionalized, mechanical, often manipulated by political interests. The symbol outstripped its meaning. The sacred had been transformed into routine, and whenever this happens, the presence withdraws. Just as the Spirit hovered over the chaos in Genesis and then distanced itself when man strayed from the essence, the Ark also seems to have followed this spiritual pattern. Where the sacred is profaned, it hides itself. The destruction of the first temple was not just a political event. It was a spiritual collapse. And the disappearance of the Ark was the ultimate symbol of this collapse. It became unnecessary at that moment, because the people had lost the necessary alignment to handle its power. The divine presence cannot be instrumentalized. It cannot be used. And when this happens, it withdraws silently. Thus, the Ark became a powerful absence, a void that said more than any ritual could say. And here comes the figure of Jesus. He emerges at a time when the temple had been rebuilt, but without the Ark. The Holy of Holies was empty. The rituals continued, but the essence was no longer there. The temple functioned as a spiritual shell, imposing from the outside but soulless. Jesus knew this. Therefore, when he enters the temple, it is not to restore the old system, but to denounce it. His famous purification of the temple, driving out the money changers and sellers, was not just a scene of indignation. It was a symbolic act of breaking with a structure that had betrayed its original function. At no point did Jesus attempt to rebuild or recover the Ark. He did not seek it, did not directly mention it, and this was not an oversight. It was a decision. Because he knew that the true presence no longer dwells in objects or external structures. It resides within the being. The kingdom of God, as he clearly stated, is within you. The external Ark served its purpose. Now was the time for the internal Ark, the time for the awakening of the presence within each human being who truly seeks. But this doesn't mean that the Ark has been forgotten. On the contrary, it has been redefined. It has become the symbol of the invisible, of that which can no longer be touched with hands, but felt with the heart. The disappearance of the Ark paves the way for a new type of spirituality, one that does not depend on temples, nor exclusive priests, nor complex rituals. An embodied, lived, vibrational spirituality. The same one that Jesus manifested when he healed, when he taught, when he was silent. The theories about the Ark being physically hidden in caves, especially under Mount Zion or in Qumran, still fascinate scholars. The idea that secret texts from the Essenes could contain clues about its location persists. And perhaps it really is somewhere, protected by initiates. But the fact that it has never been found may be in itself the greatest revelation. It should not be rediscovered to be worshipped again, but rather remembered as a stage of a deeper path, the path of internalizing the sacred. There are also suspicions that powerful religious institutions, such as the Vatican, know more than they reveal about the fate of the Ark. There are ancient manuscripts, secret libraries, and relics protected by vows of silence for centuries. Access to this knowledge is restricted to a few, and even these few are trained never to cross certain boundaries. This concealment, although controversial, may also be a form of protection. The power of the Ark cannot be handed over to a world that still seeks to control and dominate. It belongs to the pure of heart, the humble in spirit, the conscious. At the same time, the disappearance of the Ark leads us to reflect on the meaning of the torn veil at the death of Jesus. The veil that separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple, where the Ark used to be, was torn from top to bottom. This not only symbolized the end of the separation between God and man, it was also the confirmation that physical space was no longer necessary. Access to the presence, previously reserved for one, was freed for all. The sacred now resides in the awakened heart. For this reason, the Ark has become a symbol of something greater than itself. It represents the latent Christ consciousness in each one of us. The ability to carry the presence, to vibrate in tune with the source, to manifest miracles, healing, and wisdom. Jesus did not come to point to the Ark. He came to be the new center of divine presence, and then to lead us inward, so that we too could become living temples. The absence of the Ark is not a loss. It is an invitation. It is a transition. And perhaps, just perhaps, when humanity is ready to understand this, the Ark will reappear. Not as a golden object, but as an awakened collective consciousness, a point of light among nations, a vibration so high that its presence will be undeniable, not because we will see it, but because we will feel it, because it will be where it has always been, at the center of who we are, in the silence between thoughts, in the fire that burns without consuming. From the beginning of his public journey, Jesus did something unusual for his time. He challenged the sacred structures without directly attacking them. He did not overthrow the temple, but announced another. He did not renounce the rituals, but transcended them. The relationship he had with the sacred was different. It was not of external worship, but of internal manifestation. His words, his gestures, and his very existence pointed to a radical shift in the spiritual paradigm. The time of the external tabernacle had ended. Now the body itself became the temple, and at its center, the divine presence dwelled, alive and pulsating, just like the Ark among the cherubim. The most striking expression of this teaching appears in John 1:14, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us." The word dwelt in the original Greek is eskenosin, which can be translated as pitched his tent. In other words, Christ did not just come into the world, he tabernacled among men. He became the new sacred space, the new tent where the divine manifested. This changes everything. Jesus is now the meeting point between heaven and earth. He is the new Holy of Holies, accessible, alive, vibrant. There is no longer a need for a fixed place or a separate sacred object. The presence now walks among us. This symbolism deepens with each miracle. When Jesus heals, it's not just compassion in action, it's the energy of presence manifesting tangibly. When he liberates the oppressed, calms storms, or multiplies loaves, he is demonstrating that where Christ is, the field of the Ark is also there. He didn't need to carry the sacred object, because he himself was the new Ark. And just as the old Ark needed a tabernacle to support it, Jesus also needed a purified, conscious, surrendered body. His entire life was this preparation. The Gospels are filled with statements that echo the ancient mysteries. Jesus said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will rebuild it." The religious people of the time thought he was talking about Herod's temple, but he was talking about himself, the living temple, the body filled with presence, the center of the new covenant. By stating this, he was not only challenging the existing structure, he was offering a new model. A model in which each human being, by following the steps of Christ, could also become a dwelling place of the divine presence. This shift in focus is radical. Until now, all worship revolved around the sacred space, the tabernacle, the temple, the Holy of Holies. Everything was oriented towards the outside. Now Jesus reverses the flow. The kingdom of God is within you. The dwelling of presence is no longer a separate place, but a state of being, a vibration, a consciousness. This requires something new. The spiritual journey becomes inward. The search for the ark is no longer geographical, but psychological, emotional, energetic. The path now is inward. And how does one access this new Holy of Holies? Jesus gives clear clues. He speaks of the purity of heart, of prayer in secret, of total surrender. He values fasting, silence, compassion. He shows that the body is a temple and that each gesture can be a sacred rite. He teaches that faith moves mountains, that is, it transforms reality. He himself retreats to deserted places in solitude, as the ancient priests did in the Tabernacle. But now there is no incense or animal sacrifices. There is intention, connection, and awareness. When he dies on the cross, the veil of the temple, the one that separated the Holy of Holies, is torn from top to bottom. This event is more than symbolic. It represents the end of the separation between man and the divine. Access is now direct. The presence is no longer restricted. What was once touched only by a high priest, once a year, is now accessible to every sincere heart. The new tabernacle is inaugurated, and Jesus is the living way to this access. When saying, "I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father except through me," Jesus is not imposing exclusivity. He reveals structure. Way, how to enter. Truth, the code of consciousness. Life, the vibration of presence. He does not offer religion. He offers reconnection, a complete model of soul transmutation, activation of being, and return to the source. And this model perfectly mirrors the ritual path of the tabernacle, from the outer court to the Holy of Holies. Now without walls, now within. The idea of the body as a temple is not just poetic, it's real. Neuroscience shows that a heart in a state of gratitude emits coherent fields that alter the functioning of the brain and body. Quantum physics reveals that intention can affect the behavior of matter. Spirituality has taught for millennia that the divine presence inhabits inner silence. All these discoveries only confirm what Jesus demonstrated. The temple is within you, and the ark can vibrate in your heart. Jesus' proposal was not to reform the temple. It was to transcend it. His mission was not to restore the ark. It was to reincarnate it. He was the model of the complete human being, aligned, in resonance with the source. His body was the new tabernacle. His consciousness, the new Holy of Holies. His word, the new sacred fire. And his life, the new covenant. The presence that once needed to be invoked with sacrifices now naturally flowed from him, because he was a pure channel. This presence is contagious. It communicates without words. It transforms without imposition. Those who walked with him felt the atmosphere change. Those who touched him were healed. Those who heard him, even without understanding, were moved. This is the mark of presence, the same one that made the ark radiate power and life. Now it walked barefoot, with hands that touched lepers, with eyes that saw the soul, with a voice that awakened the sleeping. The ark now had a face. And this face has not disappeared. It lives, pulses, and calls for us. Because Jesus didn't just come to show, he came to invite. He called his disciples to be like him. He said we would do even greater works, that we would receive the Spirit, the presence, the strength. And this was not a future promise. It was a present reality. The ark is alive. The tabernacle walks. And the new temple is each being who surrenders, purifies themselves, and says with their heart, "Here I am." For centuries, seekers, theologians, mystics, and archaeologists have scoured the world in search of the Ark of the Covenant. From hidden deserts to sacred mountains, sealed caves and secret archives. Many have devoted their lives to finding it. But what if all this quest has always been looking in the wrong direction? What if the Ark was never lost, but merely hidden under the thickest veil there is? The veil of inner forgetfulness? Because the most disconcerting and liberating truth is this: the Ark of the Covenant lives within us, waiting to be reactivated by those who are willing to undertake the most sacred of all journeys, the journey to one's own center. To understand this revelation, we need to revisit what the Ark represents in its essence. It was the point of contact between God and man, the place where glory manifested, the channel through which the invisible became visible. In the center of the tabernacle, in the most sacred space, surrounded by veils and silence, the Ark radiated an energy that transcended words. This same structure exists within the human being. Our body is the tabernacle, our mind, the holy place, our heart, the Holy of Holies, and at the center, dormant, the presence waits. Throughout many spiritual traditions, we find different versions of the same truth. In the Hindu tradition, the body is traversed by energy centers called chakras, culminating in the heart and crown, centers of divine consciousness. In the Kabbalistic tradition, the human being is a microcosm of the tree of life, with the sacred Shekinah waiting in the center of the soul. In Sufism, there is talk of the eye of the heart, where God reveals himself to the seeker. In all these paths, the teaching is the same. What we seek outside has always been within. The journey back to the inner Ark is not easy. It requires courage, surrender, and radical sincerity. It requires navigating through the veils of the mind, purifying emotions, undoing conditioning. It demands silencing the noise of the world to hear the whisper of the soul. And above all, it requires trust, because there is no fixed map. Each one charts a unique path, but the signs are there. The restlessness that calls to the depths, the dreams that reveal forgotten truths, the encounters that touch the soul. Everything leads us to the center. Jesus taught this with sublime clarity. His words were invitations to introspection. Enter into your room and in secret, pray to your Father. The kingdom is within you. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. He did not point outward, he pointed inward. He was not seeking to build a new physical temple, but to ignite an internal awareness. And when he promised to send the Spirit, he was assuring that the presence of the Ark would no longer be limited to one place, but multiplied in each being that made room to receive it. This internal activation of presence requires simple but powerful practices. Silence, meditation, intentional prayer, fasting, forgiveness, contemplating nature, serving others. All are ways to tune into the inner field, to align with the frequency of the source. Each of these practices peels away layers of ego and fear, making room for the light of the inner Holy of Holies to manifest. Not as a fleeting emotion, but as a state of being, like a quiet certainty that God dwells within you. The body, previously seen only as a biological container, then reveals itself as the living temple. The heart, more than a physical organ, becomes the altar. The cardiac center, when vibrating in love and gratitude, emits electromagnetic fields that alter not only our internal state, but the environment around us. This has been demonstrated by science, but experienced by mystics for millennia. Where there is an awakened heart, there is an activated Ark. Where there is conscious presence, there is a living Shekinah. This discovery radically changes the way we live. We stop seeking answers in external systems and start listening to inner wisdom. We stop seeking validation and start resonating with our essence. Decisions become lighter, relationships deepen. Life takes on a different rhythm, more serene, more sacred, more connected. Because the journey is no longer about conquering the world, but about reconnecting with the part of us that never separated from the source. And this leads us to a truth that few dare to declare: you are the bearer of the Ark. Yes, you. Regardless of your story, your mistakes, your falls. Within you, there is an untouched, pure, luminous space where the presence awaits your yes. This space does not depend on religion, doctrine, or culture. It is universal, eternal, available. It is the point of contact between the finite and the infinite, and it pulses, gently, waiting to be remembered. That's why the ark was never lost. It merely fell asleep, just like us. Its absence from the outer world was an invitation to the inner world. Its concealment was the key to awakening a new consciousness, one in which we are the temple, and worship is life lived with presence. Jesus knew this. He not only lived this reality but also initiated us on this path. And today, every step back is also a step towards Him. The map of the inner ark is the same for every mystical journey, a descent into the self, a confrontation with shadows, a reunion with the light. Every pain we face, every loss, every dark night of the soul, it all purifies us. It all prepares us. There are no shortcuts. The Holy of Holies demands surrender, but as we pass through the veil, we find not only God, we find our true identity, because the ark is not an object, it is a state of being. And the most beautiful thing is that when the ark is activated within us, its presence radiates. We touch others without words. We bring healing without intention. Peace settles where there was once chaos. We become living portals. And so, the promise is fulfilled. I will make my dwelling in you. The ark shines again, not in gold, but in light. Not in a temple, but in awakened human beings. Not for a few, but for all who say yes to the presence. Throughout the millennia, the mystery of the Ark of the Covenant has been carefully constructed, concealed, interpreted, and even commercialized. But its essence has always withstood time, distorted interpretations, and human institutions. The Ark is more than an artifact, more than a sacred object. It is a powerful reminder of the direct connection between the human and the divine. And no one understood this more deeply than Jesus. He not only knew where the true ark was, he knew what it really was and what it could awaken in a human being when understood with the heart. While the religious world awaited the reconstruction of the temple and the possible rediscovery of the ark as an apocalyptic event, Jesus offered something infinitely more transformative, the definitive replacement of the old with a new spiritual paradigm. By becoming the living tabernacle, by allowing the divine presence to fully manifest through him, Jesus dissolved the need to seek the ark as an object. His teaching was not aimed at restoring the past, but revealing a new state of consciousness. This awareness is the true secret he carried. He knew that the divine presence is not something to be invoked but recognized. He knew that God does not only inhabit sacred places, but pulses everywhere, especially within the human being who opens himself with humility, surrender, and love. He knew that the power of the ark was not in the precious materials, but in the spiritual frequency it channeled. A frequency that could now inhabit anyone willing to become a living channel of light. The world, however, was not ready for this revelation, and perhaps it still isn't. That's why Jesus spoke in parables, used metaphors and symbols, and taught more with silence than with explanations. The mysteries of the kingdom are not given to curious eyes, but to willing hearts. He knew that truth, when discovered too early by immature minds, could be distorted, controlled, or used for domination. And so, the greatest secret was kept in plain sight, yet accessible only to those who tread the path of the heart. Throughout the centuries, many have sought to decipher the lost code of Jesus. Some have searched in manuscripts, others in archaeology, others in occult traditions. But what he offered was not a hidden secret, it was a living model. His very life was the manual. His behavior, his compassion, his spiritual authority, his unconditional love, his magnetic presence. All of this was the full manifestation of what the Ark represented, the embodied, conscious, vibrant, and accessible divine presence. Here is what the world still ignores. There is no longer a separation between heaven and earth. There is no more veil. There is no longer a need to seek outside what is already within. Jesus did not come just to save us. He came to remind us of our divine origin, of the temple that we are, of the energy we carry, of the call that resides within us. He came to teach us that we do not need intermediaries between us and the source. We are children, legitimate, loved, full of spiritual inheritance. The Ark, in this context, is the supreme metaphor for what we are when awakened. The prophecies about the return of the Ark, the new temple, and the Messianic era take on a new meaning when viewed in this light. The new temple will not be built by human hands, but by elevated collective consciousness. The return of the Ark will not be an excavation, but a spiritual awakening on a global scale. And the Messiah, the one who embodies the Word, has already revealed the path. It is now up to humanity to follow the steps he left, not as dogma, but as a living journey of transformation. And it has already begun. We are living in a prophetic time, where ancient truths are being remembered, where mysteries are becoming accessible again, where the inner call echoes more strongly. More and more people are feeling this call, many without even knowing how to name it. It's a longing for something greater, truer, fuller. It's the remembrance of presence. It's the Ark pulsating again in the hearts that dare to turn inward. This new era demands a new attitude, no longer that of anxious seekers but of conscious bearers. It's not about repeating old rituals but about updating their essence. Every gesture made with love, every word spoken with truth, every silence filled with presence, all this is the living liturgy of the new temple. Every being that becomes aware of their sacred nature is a spark from the reactivated Ark, a living witness that the kingdom has already arrived and it is within us. Jesus knew that the fullness of the Spirit would no longer fit in stone temples. Therefore, he promised us the Comforter, the Spirit of truth, the invisible yet irresistible presence. The same one that rested upon the Ark between the cherubim now rests upon those who become living tabernacles. The prophecy is fulfilled. I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh. And when this happens, the world changes. Reality bends to consciousness. The impossible dissolves. The divine incarnates. The final revelation, therefore, is simple and immense. The Ark is you, not out of ego, but spiritual identity. You are the meeting point, the altar, the space between the cherubim. When you are silent, it speaks. When you love, it shines. When you forgive, it heals. When you live with presence, it manifests. There's no more to seek outside. There's only what to activate within. And this awakening is not an individual event, but a collective one. When enough human beings activate their inner Ark, a new vibrational field will establish itself on Earth. A new planetary consciousness will emerge. What was once promised will become visible. The new alliance will be experienced, not read. The Earth will be a temple. Humanity will be the priesthood. And love will be the manifest presence, among all, in all, for all. This was the truth that Jesus carried, the truth that still awaits us to be fully understood. And perhaps at the end of it all, the question was never, where is the Ark? Zrenia, but rather, when will we remember that it has always been here? And now I want to hear from you, Mind Unfettered. If the Ark of the Covenant were alive within you, how would you feel its presence in your daily life? What was the moment in your life when you felt this sacred connection within your own heart the most? Share with us in the comments, not only as a story, but as a conscious expression. Each word you write here becomes part of a collective field that further activates this presence in all of us. We are building this together. The demonstration is not solitary, it is a shared alliance. And if you felt something awaken within you in this video, don't stop now, because the next revelation is ready to pierce through you. Click now on the next video on your screen. The hidden code of Sinai, the lost teaching of Jesus that could change the world. In it we reveal the hidden code given to Moses, and that Jesus mastered in silence. A lost teaching that could change everything you know about spirituality, inner power, and the true role of humanity. Until then, keep walking with presence. Keep awakening. You are part of the new arc. You are mind unfettered.